Hello and welcome to Current Events. Almost every training I facilitated in the last 4 to 5 years have occurred within a local, national, state, international context that I felt compelled to acknowledge. It's hard to, and actually I won't ignore and not name the realities that are impacting people in the room and impacting me. I cannot ethically facilitate a session. I can't do it with integrity without at least acknowledging the context we're operating in. And again, that can be at a very local level, an organizational level. Dynamics may have happened just at the state, clearly, region or national, and international. And I typically reference just a few current events and dynamics, my welcome and my framing. I have asked for a moment of silence right after a major hurricane or tsunami. I know I've done that, the latest shooting. And occasionally, I'll have people turn to a pair and talk about how they're feeling and the impact of recent events on them and those they serve. I don't start that way. I'll name it in the opening. But I usually get people up and moving, go greeting, talk about their passion for the topic we're talking about, maybe something else. And then I have, probably since Ferguson in Missouri, I have had people turn, maybe in groups of 4, just talk about how they're feeling, related to some of the local national dynamics and how are they impacting them and others. Now, I use the following principles to guide my comments. I want to be really clear. It's critical that we know our audience and the organizational context because this can be walking a tightrope. I need to know, again, scale of 0 to 10, how open are they in general to equity, inclusion, social justice, their readiness to learn. I also want to know their politics in general, the culture of the organization. Is it more open, really committed equity inclusion, or is it more resistant and more dominant culture? And if people can talk to me about literally the U.S. politics of folks. I was just working with an executive group, and there were people with very stated politics different than mine. And it's very important that I know that to remind myself that this is not about politics. This is about how are current events related to the topic of the session we're talking about? How is what's going on locally in the world impacting participants, employees, families, friends, customers, or the people that are in the room? And if I'm not paying attention, folks will bring stuff up later. And if I'm not aware, it actually could escalate faster. But if I've used the beginning to set the frame, and one of the things I talk about is the impact on current events on people in the room and people they care about and the people we're serving, it gives people permission to kind of breathe and know that in the container, we can also bring in other issues besides, quote, what's happening only in the workplace. It is critical that we have things aligning with the learning outcomes and that we bring up issues about current events without relating to our personal politics. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. But this is about diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. It is not about my personal politics or politics in general. Now, it can be hard to balance. I know I have felt deeply triggered probably these last at least 2.5 years in very deep emotions. There have been so many national and international events that are just so impacting me. And so to be leading a workshop when I know the group is deeply impacted and I am, it's not easy. And it's a lot easier actually to talk politics. It's a lot harder to keep our primary goal about how do we deepen the capacity of participants to create equity, inclusion, social justice in everything they do in the organization and in their community. Now, if I come out and talk directly about politics, or if someone makes a negative political comment about someone, a politician, I need to quickly interrupt that. And I'll bet most every workshop I've done in the last couple of years, I've said something like, this workshop actually isn't about politics. And people could have voted many different ways and also be doing great work around equity inclusion. And people look at me like I'm talking a language they do not understand, but I do believe that at some level, that people could have voted for someone who may be in a party that's not mine, and does not publicly talk about equity inclusion, but individuals in those parties can be working for that in their communities, in their school systems, in this organization, and people who may have voted the way I did in a party that talks a lot about equity inclusion. I meet people all the time with implicit racist bias, classist bias, that's not that far under the surface, if it is at all. And so just because you vote one way, in my core belief, does not mean that you cannot come into a work environment or a community environment and really care about the needs of the full breadth of differences we're here living with, serving, working with, and create environments where everyone can succeed to the best of their capacity and they don't run into any artificial barriers or obstacles that were created just because someone wanted to keep more privilege than others. I believe that, and I have to believe that, literally get up each day. So I am here not to talk about politics, because if I do, if a comment is a negative comment about someone whose politics I disagree with, or I mentioned who I might have voted for, then I am not modeling the behaviors that I am teaching. And more importantly, some or many participants might shut down, resist learning, write me off. And so I'm meeting my ego needs instead of the needs of the group and what we're here to do that day. I'm no longer as effective as I could be. I'm there to facilitate learning. I'm here to deepen people's capacity to create inclusive learning environments, to get more critical thinking, the capacity to do perspective taking, to get deeper empathy, broadening how far they can have empathy across group identities, privileged and marginalized. And I'm here to help them deepen their capacity to have effective engagement, particularly if they disagree, and how to stay in those ways to have effective problem solving, more collaborative decision making. And I truly believe that these issues, critical events, can transcend politics in a traditional sense. As I've mentioned, people across parties can and have come together to work on similar issues. Now, in my own time, that's different. If you're a Facebook friend, you clearly know my politics. But I believe we ethically, with integrity, need to keep a separation between our personal politics and those that are in the room, and not conflate politics, equity, inclusion. I think it undermines our organizational change efforts. As a facilitator of diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice workshops, I'm there to support the learning of all participants and model behaviors that I want them to learn and replicate in their daily lives. And I'm just saying me, this is what the organization wants and needs, and I'm an instrument for change. So take a deep breath. I know some of y'all might be kind of bumping into what I just said and struggling. Just keep breathing. Again, the context is foundational workshops inside organizations. So, I want to now talk about how do you show up and talk about current events. Well, first of all, you got to stay current. Local, national, regional, international events. Now, some are in pretty mainstream media, especially in the US. So hurricanes, floods. Now, how they get covered and for how long, you could look at the coverage for Houston, Texas, compared to Florida, compared to Puerto Rico. I'll put a comma there. But that's what I might say in a workshop. It's a way to get issues in the room without me having to name my politics. And then floods, where they have hurricanes or some other natural or unnatural disaster. And while a flood may have happened a month ago, that local area might still be trying to rebuild. People might be trying to just still find relatives. And then, as you know from Katrina as well as other floods, some people literally have to leave that area because they don't have the resources, either personal, state, national, to rebuild. And so that could still be impacting people for years to come. The forest fires that were so prevalent in the fall 2018 in California, the Northwest, the Southwest, the devastation, and there's so many deaths and just destruction of probably tens of thousands of homes, if not hundreds, if we add them all up. So again, where are you presenting? Or if you're doing virtual and people are from literally all over the country or all over the world, it's important we acknowledge, particularly current events. Earthquakes, the tsunami, Indonesia got so little. You can tell when I'm recording this in the last couple of days. It's now up to, last I saw was 222 people killed. But I didn't see that necessarily in the mainstream media, Facebook and other ways I get news. So There could be folk who have family in Indonesia. So I might just enter and just saying, let's take a deep breath. Just want to acknowledge and remember the things that are on my heart, but what's on your heart? You'll see in the workshops I have people early on. I saw Jamie Washington do this first. A what's up? What's weighing on your heart? What's going on well in your life? And that's a place where people can also bring in, after I do an introduction, some other things that could be national or local or in family. You need to, I believe, clear attention to the latest massacres and murders that are happening in this country, well, around the world, but in this country, we have had such an onslaught of gun violence in so many ways. And so lately I've been talking about the Tree of Life Synagogue, but in the same breath, I'm talking about Emmanuel Church in Charleston. And again, it was 3 years ago, and some people may say that's a long time ago, but I was literally just working in Charleston this fall, and the Emmanuel Church massacre is on the hearts of everyone that I met. The Sikh Temple massacre in Oak Creek, the Pulse massacre, while these again are 2 and 3 years old, maybe even a little longer for the Sikh one. The Islamic violence that happens that doesn't get in the news, the anti-homophobic or the homophobic violence, the anti-trans violence. I'll often, if I'm on Facebook, I see another trans woman of color murdered. I'll mention that in the series of things I name. I just really want to use my welcome, and we'll talk about this in another video, how I do the welcome. And this might be 20 seconds. I just name that as I enter, here's how I'm feeling. Now, if nothing's been happening the last couple of weeks, I may not name anything, but to be honest, I can't get through a day or two of Facebook without seeing something. And even if nothing's come up lately, particularly if we're talking about breadth of difference and race is centered in that organization, or if not, I will center it. I will name at some point the unarmed killing of people of color, particularly African American, particularly male presenting, particularly cisgender presenting. Interacting with police. Now, I just did this with a senior executive group, but their organization was all about creating equity inclusion, and they knew that anything that happened in their city or state re-stimulated for African Americans and all people of color this long legacy in the last few years, if not literally centuries. So just be aware, we're talking about equity, inclusion, social justice, and you might be thinking, I'm working in a corporation. The participants in that room, their families, there's probably not a person of color in that room, particularly if they're medium to dark skin. They have children or nieces, nephews. Don't think every day, will these children come back unharmed, or will their friends come back home unharmed? I'm not saying it's just the police. There's a lot of gun violence, but the number of people in police interactions, if not police custody, that comes across my Facebook is intolerable, totally unacceptable, horrific, and the silence is outrageous as well. So you get to make your own decisions. I'm just going to tell you in this course what I do is I'm balancing needs of the room and their learning, and people cannot hear if they're in pain or if they're triggered in rage. And if there's been a latest dynamic that people are out protesting and marching, when the children, thousands upon thousands of children were and still are separated from families, people seeking asylum in this country. And sometime this fall, maybe it was this summer, I was at a march here in Denver. I could not do a workshop without acknowledging, because people all over this country and around the world were having marches about the separation of families at the border and the immigration dynamics in this country. And so I'm not saying 10 minutes, even 2 minutes, but if you don't name these type of racist dynamics that are around us, as well as other types of dynamics, people in the room who have those marginalized identities, or friends and family, colleagues, are going to think this is diversity light and is this a waste of my time? So this is one of many ways as a facilitator you can say, oh no, we're talking real issues here. Now we're focused in the organization, but by naming these dynamics, talking about Ferguson, just, this was a number of years ago, but in 2015, 16, I was talking about the University of Missouri, Mizzou, and the other marches and protests are happening at hundreds of college campuses, even if the campus I was on or that community I was in, because you can be in a nonprofit and community, but if the students are marching on a campus, you know that community members are as well. Standing Rock again just a few years ago, But similar, if you're paying attention, the same dynamics are happening around environmental racism, stealing of land. And so depending where you are and who's in your room, after you do a land acknowledgement, you also may want to acknowledge the ongoing dynamics. So another Women's March, I believe it's the third annual, is coming up around January 20th, State of the Union. So knowing, depending when you're listening to this, this is our second week, and so it's right before, if you started when I did in early January. So take a deep breath. What happened the last 2 days in my life is I turn on Facebook and I see, looks like a coach cutting the locks off a presenting African-American male in a wrestling, and the conversation was he either had to choose between forfeiting the match or getting his hair cut off public. I was so outraged, you can tell I still am. In that state, one could not do a workshop this week. And if you're working with athletics, you could not do a workshop even in the next few months without acknowledging that, in my opinion. And acknowledging where were the other wrestlers, where were the coaches on both sides stepping up and saying, oh no, we will not let this happen. Where were all the people in the bleachers coming down onto the floor and saying, no, this will not happen in our presence? Where was that? So take a deep breath. You might find that locally or even in the organization, there are issues around more institutional oppression. If I look at the national level, the Me Too movement, the sexual violence, sexual assault around Olympic athletes. So again, pay attention, talk to your people that brought you in, look at their website, see what programs they've had in the organization lately, what's been talked about, so that you know all those things. And one more, this is bowl season, and it's Super Bowl season. And so again, for the Super Bowl, as well as many college towns, if the students are still there or they're coming back, you will most likely see a differential reaction to how predominantly white and male students celebrate winning these big events, and how folks who are protesting the Kavanaugh hearings, protesting another police shooting, how the public reactions to those, not only how they're covered in the media, but also how police officers respond, and state officials require police officers to respond. So just want you to pay attention, because your people are coming to workshops full of all these images, whether it's mine's Facebook, it could be Snapchat, Instagram. I'm sure there are others. I have no idea. Twitter. I kind of do Twitter. So take a deep breath, because you may be at Cumulative Impact just having me recount all the different current and recent events that could be going on that are impacting participants, impacting you. So we need to remember, whether it's one recent incident and you're like, oh, it's an incident, but it's re-stimulated all the other incidents that are related, that have been happening in the last literally years. So the cumulative impact of all these issues, all these critical incidents, could be sitting in people's hearts and bodies as you say, hello, how are you? And if you don't acknowledge it, they may stuff it or they may not, and they will come up. Again, talking about it may help you get more grounded, because you're mostly probably at cumulative impact as well. And so naming it is not only about the participants. I do it to be able to breathe more deeply and to acknowledge that I too am impacting what's going on. Because what's going on is folks are triggered. And again, as we get much farther into this work, we'll be doing a lot more work around navigating difficult situations when you have a hot button, when you have a triggering event. I'm not saying it's easy. As I've mentioned, I'm often, especially this last fall and 2 falls, well, I can't find a season I didn't, but there are days that I'm in a great mood. But other days, I might be in a good mood, but I'm also deeply triggered. I'm navigating my own triggered emotions, while I also know in the room there are complicated layers of triggers and cumulative impact that I may never know about. But if I've thought about the group memberships, if I asked about who's going to be in the room, and as I come in, I'm meeting people, I'm greeting people, having conversations, I'm kind of reading the room energetically, I might even mention a couple things as I spend that 20, 30 minutes engaging other folk. I'm setting up, but I'm also right there meeting people. Then as I move into leading the workshop, opening it, I have a frame and an intuitive sense of what's needed to be said so that people can breathe, exhale, and like, okay, we can learn here because this is something to do with what's going on nationally. It's not a separate one-off. So again, we're going to talk lots more about triggering events, when you're triggered, when other people are triggered. But for now, I really want to encourage you to talk honestly if you have co-facilitators. If not, find mentors and coaches, or even find them if you are co-facilitating, and really help them support you identifying what are your potential triggers given what's currently going on, local, regional, state, national, world. What do you anticipate may come up in you, in the group? And then strategize and practice. What are ways to engage and respond in the moment that furthers learning and builds a container for authentic dialogue? It is critical we acknowledge the current events and the potential cumulative impact that could be impacting the participants in the room and you. All this can be a critical aspect of creating an effective learning environment and building the container for more effective engagement for all the participants and for you. I'll see you in the next video.